Your API container crashes with connect ECONNREFUSED 172.20.0 5432 within 10 seconds, even though all containers show as started. The root cause depends on only waits for the container to start, not for PostgreSQL to be ready. Let's break down why this happens and how to fix it. Welcome to TheCodeForge. Before we dig into that production issue, let's cover Docker Compose. Docker Compose is a declarative tool that defines and runs multi-container Docker applications from a single YAML file. Instead of manually wiring containers with Docker run commands, you describe services, networks, and volumes in Docker Compose, YML. Every Compose file has a few top-level keys. Services is the main one. Each entry is a container. Volumes defines named storage that outlives containers. Networks lets you control which services can see each other. The depends on key controls start order, not readiness. Here's a full 3-tier Compose file with a React frontend, Node API, and PostgreSQL database. Notice the health check on Postgres DB and the depends on with condition, service healthy on the API. This ensures the API waits until Postgres is actually ready. The Docker Compose YML file has several top-level keys. Services is the only required one. Volumes persist data, networks isolate traffic, and configs manage non-file configuration. The include key lets you break monolithic files into T-moned modules. Here are the most frequently used Docker Compose commands: memorize up, down, ps, logs, exec, run, build, and config. Docker Compose config is the single most important command for validating your Compose file before deploying. Hardcoding passwords directly in Docker Compose. YML is one of the most common and dangerous mistakes. The correct pattern is a env file alongside your Compose file. Docker Compose automatically reads env and substitutes variable name dollars placeholders. Here's a env example file. You commit this to Git as a template. Each developer copies it to env, fills in real values, and never commits env. The actual env lives in git ignore. A recurring confusion. Developers think the env file sets environment variables inside the container. It does not. The env file exists only for the Compose file parser. It provides values for variable interpolation in the YAML. The environment key inside a service is what actually sets environment variables inside the container. Here are examples of correct and incorrect patterns. Example 1 hardcodes credentials, never do this. Example 2 uses env interpolation correctly. Example 3 uses env file directive. Example 4 mixes both, but be careful with the confusion. When Compose starts your services, it creates a virtual network and registers each service under its own DNS name. That name is simply the service name you defined in the YAML. So when your API container wants to connect to Postgres, it uses Postgres DB 5432, the service name and the container port, not the host mapped port. Here's how to inspect Compose networks. Use Docker Network ls to list networks, Docker Network inspect to see who's on them, and ens lookup from inside a container to verify DNS resolution. The frontend should not be able to resolve the database name if network isolation is working. Profiles let you tag services that should only run in certain contexts, like a database admin UI in development. Override files let you maintain one base config and swap environment-specific settings. Always run Docker Compose config to verify the merged result before deploying. Here's a production override file. It replaces the local build with a pre-built image, removes bind mounts, adds resource limits, and configures structured logging. The pgadmin service is tagged with a dev profile, so it only starts with profile dev. Named volumes outlive containers and survive restarts. Bind mounts are for development. They mirror your host file system, but they break in production when your orchestration layer doesn't have the same paths. TMPFS is for secrets you want to incinerate on container stop. Here's a volume example for Postgres. The named volume Postgres data is defined under the top-level volumes key and mounted at /var/lib/postgresql/data. This ensures data survives Docker-Compose down. Default bridge networks work fine until two apps both claim port 8080. The fix: separate your traffic into logical networks. Split internal API communication from public-facing ingress traffic and isolate data plane traffic from admin channels. Here's a network isolation example. The API gateway is on front-end and back-end networks. Order service is on back-end and DB network. Postgres is only on DB network, which is internal, true, no internet access. This prevents the front-end from reaching the database directly. Depends on only waits for the container to start, not for the process inside to be healthy. That's the gap. The fix: add a health check block to every service that depends on another. Use start period to give slow services time to initialize. Then use depends on with condition, service healthy. Here's a health check example. Postgres uses PG isReady, Readiness uses Readiness cli ping. The app depends on both with condition, service healthy. This ensures the app only starts after both dependencies are actually ready to accept connections. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. The payment service used depends on, Postgres DB without condition, service healthy. Compose started the Postgres container, but Postgres was still initializing. The app tried to connect, got fatal, the database system is starting up and crashed. This happened on every deploy. The fix: add a health check to the Postgres service using PG isReady and change the depends on to condition, service healthy. Now Compose waits until Postgres is actually ready before starting the app. No more crash on deploy. This is the gotcha from the incident. Depends on without condition. Service healthy only waits for the container to start, not for the process inside to be ready. Your app will crash if it tries to connect before the database is ready. Using localhost inside a container refers to the container itself, not the host machine. Containers should communicate by service name on the internal Docker network. The correct URL uses the service name. Postgres//user, pass at Postgres DB, 5432/DB. Hardcoding secrets in Docker Compose, YML is dangerous. If that file ever gets committed to a public repo, your credentials are exposed permanently. Always use env files and reference variables with var. When you cannot add a health check to a service, e.g., a third-party image, use a wait-for-ITSH script as the entry point. This script pulls a TCP port until it's open, then starts your app. It's a lightweight alternative to condition, service healthy. Docker Compose v2, integrated into Docker CLI, uses Docker Compose, no hyphen, while v1 uses Docker Compose. The article shows both, but v2 is now the default. If you use v2, the version key in Docker Compose, YML is optional and ignored. Compose always uses the latest schema. Ensure your CI scripts use the correct command to avoid confusion. The article mentions profiles, but doesn't show a concrete example. Here's a service that only starts with profile monitoring. This keeps your dev stack lean while still having monitoring available on demand. Here's how to diagnose common Compose issues. Use Docker Compose logs to see application errors. Use Docker Compose exec to inspect environment variables inside a container. Use enslookup to verify DNS resolution. Always run Docker Compose config before deploying to validate the merged configuration. Let's run through some common interview questions. What does depends on actually guarantee? Only container start order, not service readiness. How do you pass environment variables to a container? Use environment, key, or env file in service definition. How do containers resolve each other's addresses? Compose DNS maps service names to container IPs. And a few frequently asked questions. What is the difference between env and environment? Env is for YAML interpolation. Environment sets container env vars. How do I make a service wait for a database to be ready? Use healthcheck plus condition, service healthy. Can I use Docker Compose in production? Yes, for single host, but use Kubernetes for multi-host orchestration. Key takeaways: depends on only controls start order, not readiness. Always pair it with a health check. Never hardcode secrets, use env files. Containers communicate by service name, not localhost. Use multiple networks to enforce security boundaries between tiers. Ready to go deeper? Up next, Docker registry and Docker Hub, then Docker security best practices, then multi-stage Docker builds. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.